Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Millstone Report. My name is Paul Harrell. Thanks so much for being with us. I hope you had a great, restful weekend. I hope you had a good Lord's Day, a great Sunday. And, man, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much. As always, we can't do the program without you watching every single day. We got a lot to get to. Interesting conference that happened earlier this month. We're going to cover it because there was a conference put on by, I guess, Joel Webbin over at Right Response Ministries. We'll get to that later. I mean, it was earlier in the month, right after the tariffs. So earlier in the month of April, beginning of this month, right after the tariff news broke, there was a panel that was released. I think a lot of it's behind a paywall, but there was a panel release with Stephen Wolfe, the author of The Case for Christian Nationalism, John Harris, Calvin Robinson from across the pond. That was, in some Christian X circles, was actually a controversial invite. Aaron McIntyre and Steve Deace was there. And what Steve Deace said was, at least on the panel, I thought was very interesting. I'm going to try to cover it best I can. It's a lengthy panel discussion, but it certainly was interesting. We're going to get to that a little later in the program. Before we go any further, I want to remind you that this portion of the program brought to you by Red Vive Health. That's redvivehealth.org/Paul. Go to redvivehealth.org/Paul and check out the healing power of light in the tremendous red light, clinical strength red light panels you can have in your home. It's the technology Big Pharma does not want you to know about. We'll tell you more about Red Vive Health a little later in the program. First, we're going to get to the news. This is the first news that I saw this morning when I woke up, which was this interesting blackout, massive, catastrophic blackout in Europe, mainly from what I can tell, Spain, Portugal, maybe a few other EU countries I don't know if they are currently, but they were yesterday in the midst of blackouts that have crippled their infrastructure, crippled their transportation. This was the first post that I saw, actually. We'll throw it up on the screen here. Shadow of Ezra saying that a massive blackout swept across Europe, leaving countries like France, Spain, Belgium, Portugal without power. The outage cripples critical infrastructure, shutting down airports, halting subway systems, and disrupting communication networks. Authorities say the cause of the blackout is still under investigation. Many people speculating, okay, was this a cyber attack? Was it something else? If you scroll down here, there's a follow-up post, at least when it comes to Portugal's grid operator, saying the massive power outage was triggered by a fault in the power grid linked to a, quote, rare atmospheric phenomenon. So according to some reports, the blackout across the pond is due to a, quote, rare atmospheric phenomenon. It goes on the post. He explains that extreme temperature swings in Spain caused an anomalous oscillations in the high-voltage transmission lines. Those disruptions then triggered a chain reaction leading to widespread disturbances across Europe's interconnected energy network. Yeah, how's that for the European Union utopia? Due to the complexity of the damage, officials warn it could take up to a week for the grid to fully stabilize. So that's this is one report here talking about a rare atmospheric phenomenon. I mean, could it be, some sort of solar storm? I don't know. But the reason I'm covering this is because when I first saw this story this morning, my mind immediately went to a potential false flag, and I knew immediately that there were going to be people blaming Russia for this attack. Maybe it was. But I knew immediately people were going to be blaming Russia because it just fits in with the narrative of painting Russia as evil incarnate. As again, somebody once accused me of ignoring Vladimir Putin being literally evil incarnate on this world. Now, Clayton Morris, did he live in Portugal for a time? It seems like I think he did. Maybe he still does. I don't know. Clayton Morris from Redacted says that here's a friendly reminder that most of the Iberian power grid, so we're talking about the Iberian Peninsula there, that's in Europe, and that's where Spain and Portugal are. Most of that power grid, he says, is owned by China and has been since the year 2011. And see, you look at the very first comment on this post. Friendly reminder, Russia has been ramping up acts of terrorism, including cyber attacks and attacks on infrastructure against Europe. Interesting. National File's take about this whole post is about, how gatekeepers love to gatekeep. Food, shelter, water, power, energy, gas. Some people speculating that this is a convenient crisis that could make Europe even more totalitarian than it already is. But here's another explanation for the massive blackout in Europe right now. One potential explanation. So this was posted on April 22nd. So just a few days ago, you had these headlines praising the climate conscious governments of Europe, specifically Spain. Says Spain hits first weekday of 100% renewable power on national grid. Spain's grid ran entirely on renewable energy for the first time on April 16th with wind, solar, and hydro meeting all peninsular electricity demand during a weekday. 5 days later, solar set a new record, generating 20,120 MW of instantaneous power, covering 78.6% of demand and 61.5% of the grid mix. So days after this news, this celebration based in Gaia worship, days after this news breaks, they're facing a total blackout. Some people are connecting the dots on that. Then we have, and this was just a few of the tweets that I saw in response to this, 2 hours into the blackout in many countries of Europe. So this was this morning, posted at 7:22 a.m., 2 hours into a blackout in many countries of Europe, and it's already small chaos. I don't even need to see the news to know they're going to blame it on Russia or China. My conspiracy friend warned me for 2 years this is going to happen and accelerate from here. They will do multiple days. At some point, survival of the fittest will break out. The purpose to create a more totalitarian system after destruction, a la 1984. Here's another post. They'll say Russia's responsible for the blackout in Europe. Mark my words, it's the next false flag. And then we have this, interesting whether Europeans will have the guts to call things by their proper name. So here's somebody says this was Russia. They're saying that Russia launched a cyber attack on EU's power grid. This is what one guy's saying. He's saying this has got to be Russia. Russia has to be to blame for it. Here's just a few of the, let's see, these are just a few of the images here of people are, walking. So this is a subway, I guess, with those emergency lights. They had one where people were walking through tunnels. Yeah, look how dark it is. It appears to be some sort of subway corridor. And here's another one. The trains are stopped there. So this is what people are experiencing or have experienced. But we had this. So, again, a lot of times, you can preface these things. Back on April the 10th, the Daily Mail ran this headline: Russia could cause worldwide internet blackouts by sabotaging undersea cables as NATO warned over danger posed to defenseless cables used for vital infrastructure. So, again, the narrative is being seeded here. And the reason this is interesting to me is because we are... If you read the headlines, it depends on, Donald Trump, he sits down with Zelensky at the Pope's funeral. By the way, he told Macron, Emmanuel Macron showed up, wanted it to be a three-person meeting between Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky, and himself, and Trump told him to leave. They had three chairs sitting there. Trump, from what I can tell, just based on the video evidence, politely asked Macron, this needs to be me and him. Now, why would Trump not want Macron at the meeting with Zelensky? Well, because Macron is going to run and tell, not that Zelensky wouldn't either, but Macron is going to represents the status quo. Macron represents a political class that doesn't actually represent the citizens of France. If Ukraine has been the money laundering depot for the uniparty in the West and in America, what do you think Ukraine's been used for European despots? Again, my whole theory here, my whole hypothesis is they look at the populism that successfully won in 2016 and successfully won in 2024 here in America, and European leaders are very, very worried. And if you start cutting off the funds, you start cutting off the USAID, the NGOs, and I think they're all being used, or many of them rather, being used to subvert democratic elections in Europe. This is my main hypothesis. And I think they want the Ukraine war to continue, so the money laundering operation continues to keep European leaders in power. It's maybe a wild conspiracy theory, but it's one that I think is just, I can't get it out of my head. I think that's what's going on here. So, yeah, Trump not wanting Macron in, because Macron does not want the war in Ukraine between Russia. They want the boogeyman that is Russia. This is my opinion anyway. So the reason I think this is interesting, seeding the narrative here from just a couple of weeks ago, and now we have these blackouts in Europe. People are immediately online saying, hey, they're going to blame this on Russia. Maybe it was Russia. I don't know per se, but I do know one thing. I want the war in Ukraine to end. I want the killing to stop. I agree with President Trump on that. I think that the meat grinder should end. What they're doing, conscripting these Ukrainian boys that don't want to go there, and the amount of people that are dying, the amount of Ukrainians that are dying, the country's been decimated, the amount of Russians that are dying. It's terrible, and it's pointless, and it needs to stop. But there are forces that want to continue to use Ukrainian souls and Russian souls as cannon fodder to, again, I think, continue this conflict, because there's just so much money to be made, and there's so much profit to be made with war and killing. And so I don't think Macron wants the war to end. I think Macron is one of these people that probably was emboldened Zelensky to go into the Oval Office and act like he did, and was so rude and entitled. He's got these other people whispering in his ear saying, no. Don't give in to peace. Don't give in to, the incarnate of evil incarnate, Vladimir Putin. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And so I just see all this as potentially connected. Maybe it's just a regular blackout. Maybe it's just because they put too much emphasis on green energy. Maybe it's a false flag. Who knows? But again, if you have peace in Ukraine, and the United States normalizes relationships with Russia as their stated goal, it makes it very unlikely that you go to war with Iran, because Iran is a Russian proxy. So I see that there are a lot of forces that don't want peace in either region, and I think some know that if you normalize relationships with Russia, it makes it very unlikely. It actually means that you might be able to get a deal with Iran and avoid a war. And we don't want to get dragged into a war. Donald Trump telling Time Magazine he's not going to let Israel or Netanyahu drag him into the war, but if negotiations fail, then we will lead the pack. Speaking of false flags, we should be very, very, I would say very, very cognizant of the idea of a false flag to drag us into war, as is the case. You know what one of my favorite movies is, even though it's based on... it's Rob Reiner. It's directed by Rob Reiner, who's, a Hollywood leftist and communist, is Princess Bride. It's one of my favorites because if you really look at the plot, the whole thing is based on a false flag. The whole premise of the movie, the thing that kicks the plot off is they are going to blame a murder on another country so they can go to war with it. Have you ever noticed that in Princess Bride? Anyway. Something to think about. Earlier in the day, we had this news out of the White House press briefing room. A man by the name of Rogan O'Handley, otherwise known as DC Drano on X, decided to ask the question about Donald Trump in light of the judges and how these judges are trying to thwart the deportation of violent, illegal gang members at every turn. Obviously, on Friday, we covered the arrest of that Judge Dugan in Wisconsin. Should the President of the United States do like FDR or Lincoln did and suspend the writ of habeas corpus for illegal aliens? That is the question that was posed. Let's take a listen.
New media seat today, as always, Rogan O'Hanley, former Hollywood entertainment lawyer, I didn't know that, Rogan, who got fed up with the far-left ideologies of California and now posts conservative political commentary online for his more than 7 million followers across all major platforms. He joins us today from the great state of Florida. Why don't you kick us off today, Rogan?
Thank you, Caroline. In Trump's first 99 days, we've seen a coordinated assault on the rule of law by radical judges. We're thwarting his agenda with an unprecedented number of national injunctions. These judges are providing more due process to violent MS-13 and Tren de Aragua illegal aliens than they did for American citizens who peacefully protested on January 6th. As Stephen Miller has highlighted, it would be utterly ridiculous to have full trials and appeals for the more than 15 million illegal aliens that came across our border under Joe Biden. Many are now calling for Trump to circumvent these radical judges and consider suspending the writ of habeas corpus solely for these illegal aliens in accordance with the terms of Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, which explicitly allows for such a measure when there is a rebellion or invasion. There are strong
Okay, we cut out there for a second.
Greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and Democrats' favorite president of all time, FDR. All three of which are not only celebrated by historians, but are immortalized on our national currency with their faces on there. Furthermore, all three used it against American citizens, where in this instance we would only be using it against illegal aliens. I think almost every reasonable American would agree that 15 million illegal aliens coming across our border under Joe Biden counts as an invasion, especially since many, as you highlighted, are now robbing, assaulting, raping, and killing American citizens. Historic assaults on our republic require reciprocal action from our government. Can you please let us know if and when the Trump administration is planning to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to circumvent these radical judges who are infringing on his Article 2 powers and to start shipping out illegals en masse?
Wow.
I have not heard.
All right, before we get to her response, could you imagine, oh my gosh, the absolute meltdown that's going to occur if this were to happen? So if you if you go read the Constitution, and it's right there, Article 1, Section 9, you've got Clause 1, which is about migration and importation, and then you go down to Clause 2, habeas corpus. It says the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. I mean, again, I don't know if there's ever been a more clear and dry case to do something like this when you're talking about the safety of the public, which has clearly been put at risk, and that this has been an invasion. Let's get to Caroline Levitt's answer.
Such discussions take place, but I can assure you that the president and the entire administration are certainly open to all legal and constitutional remedies to ensure we can continue with the promise of deporting illegal criminals from our nation's borders. And I also agree with the premise of your question, which doesn't happen in this room often, but I do agree with yours. It is absurd that the previous administration was allowed to allow 15 million, that we know about, illegal aliens into this country with very little pushback from our judicial branch. But this president is trying to simply enforce our nation's immigration laws and is facing roadblock after roadblock. So we're complying with court orders, but as Tom Homan has said every day, we're going to continue to forge ahead with this mass deportation campaign, and the president is open to all remedies to do that. Thanks for being here today, Rogan.
If I can also answer your question, as far as the judges, look, we just arrested the judge, Pam Bondi, for impeding ICE enforcement removals. I said from day one, you don't have to support ICE's operations. You can support sanctuary cities if that's what you desire to do. Sanctuary cities can stand aside and watch ICE keep their communities safe, because any public official, whether you're mayor, city councilman, or governor, their number one responsibility is protection of the communities. And ICE has been clear, we're targeting public safety threats and national security threats. I can't believe there's any elected official, and especially a judge, that doesn't believe we should be doing that, and they should be helping us. But I said from day one, you can sit aside and watch, you can argue against us all you want and protest all you want, but when you cross that line, I've said this 1,000 times, when you cross that line to impediment or knowingly harboring, concealing an illegal alien from ICE, you will be prosecuted, judge or not. And as far as releasing so many...
So you want to know, I mean, there are some people still thinking that there's more of these prosecutions that are going to take place. The more we see, our institutions, and we've said this for a long time, our institutions have been fully captured by the left, and leftist thought is their default setting. And they are going to do what that default setting requires, which is to just, refuse to submit that the American people have chosen a completely different direction, 180 degrees in the opposite direction of where we want this country to go, what we want this country to be. And they're resisting. And so at some point, if you're not going to resist, the concept of winnowing your enemies is a very real thing here, and it needs to occur. It certainly does. Before we go any further, I want to tell you about Red Vive Health and the great folks over at redvivehealth.org/Paul. Here it is. We've been talking a lot about this, and we're going to continue to tell you about it because it's becoming a hit with the audience. This is technology Big Pharma doesn't want you to know about. This is the healing power of light. It's red light, it's near infrared light. So the panels emit both of these spectrums. So you need to get a panel. There's different competitors out there, and they don't give you the near infrared. They're just giving you the red. So these two different wavelengths are very important. They're naturally emitted by the sun, but the panels are clinical strength, and you get it in targeted doses, and they have a healing effect on the body. First, the red light. It's absorbed by the skin, leads to enhanced skin health, collagen production, anti-aging. Then you've got the near-infrared light, which penetrates deeper into the body, reaching your bones, your muscles, your tissues, even your organs. We're talking about stimulating your cells at the mitochondria level, and the energy that you get from this is incredible. Also, wound healing is a big deal. I have a friend who had a bruise on their hip, offered to let them in the house to use my red light panel so that the bruising could go away. And there's definitely been signs of instant results from it only a day later. And so it really sounds like a catch-all, but from what I can tell, based on the research, and I want you to do your own research, it is a catch-all. It sounds too good to be true. That's because it is, and it's technology Big Pharma doesn't want you to know about. There's 0% interest financing available. I want you to go shop right now at redvivehealth.org/Paul, lighting your path to wellness. That's Red Vive, for those of you listening to the audio-only version of this show, VIVE, redvive health.org/Paul. Okay, so there was, as I mentioned earlier, and so this is the part of the program where I'm just taking kind of a point of personal privilege for something that very much is interesting to me. So I was following over on. So if you in the circles that I follow on X, not that I'm really involved, I just follow a lot of these guys that were at this conference called How to Defeat Trash World. Christ is King. How to Defeat Trash World. It was a conference that was held by Right Response Ministries, and it was earlier in the month, and it was controversial among some circles on Christian X. There was a debate. It was controversial because it was put on by Joel Webbin. And by the way, if you ever go to like Right Wing Watch, which has been in the past actually a great farming tool for finding people that say things that are true, although it may be controversial. Joel Webbin is certainly one of those pastors who Right Wing Watch likes to make much of all the time. But anyway, so they held this conference, and they got people like Steve Deace to come. They got people like John Harris to come, Stephen Wolfe to come as well, who's a friend of mine. He wrote the book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. We've interviewed Stephen on the program before. Also, they got R.N. McIntyre from The Blaze. Steve Deace is also from the Blaze. And they got Calvin Robinson, who is, I think, Anglican, and he's been, he's had his own controversy of some of the things that he said. Obviously he's from England. So It was really a fascinating group of people, and I don't know what the whole conference was because they haven't released it all. But a couple of days ago, they released a big portion of this conference, like an 80-minute segment. And we're not going to have time to get through all of it, but some of the highlights, I thought it was just incredibly an interesting discussion that centered around concerns people have, moving forward, centered around the feminization of the church, centered around trying to answer this question, what is a nation? Is a nation just an economic zone, or is it a place for a particular people? Fascinating discussions back and forth from different people who have, different, nuanced opinions about things. And I think the most interesting part, and somebody said this, that Steve Deace was there from The Blaze, and this is one of the rare instances where arguably everybody up on that stage was to the right of Steve Deace, who was obviously on the right as well. And so I found it an interesting discussion, and so I'm going to walk through some of it. We're going to talk through some of it right now, and it's actually we're going to start right there, kind of in the middle, or kind of at the very beginning of this conference that was released. Again, it was about an hour and 24 minutes, and this is part of what it sounded like. Let's take a listen.
Well, I will tell you, I have
reevaluated
in the last...
Well, if the internet will work.
And especially post-COVID, a lot of orthodoxies. I mean, I was way more involved in politics and...
Let me do this real quick. I just want to refresh this because it's just going to be better to do it this way. And I've got these things. I've got these things time-stamped.
I learned all the post-COVID. A lot of my pre-existing orthodoxies. I mean, I was way more involved in politics and conservative causes long before I was converted. My wife is here with me in the front row. When we first started dating, I mean, she got 2 books to learn more about me. The Way Things Ought to Be and See, I Told You So, Rush Limbaugh's 2 best-selling books. All right? And so, I mean, I was college Republicans. I learned all the orthodoxies. I read all the Thomas Sowell. I knew all this stuff.
Let's stop right there. They're talking. R.N. McIntyre just got through talking about essentially, you can have a good economy, but if you don't have, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what do you do all that for? Are you doing that just to be an economic zone, or are you doing that for the people that actually live there? Like quality of life actually matters. But let's just talk about what Steve Deace just said there. He was firmly on the conservative right, firmly in college Republicans. Firmly into the, he'd read Rush Limbaugh's books and everything, was a conservative, but was not a converted Christian. So that's the perspective that he is bringing to the table here, where you can be, and I guess in modern day contexts, obviously the late, great Rush Limbaugh is no longer with us, but we have these new platforms, we have these new politics are different now. There's entirely different political coalitions. The whole red-pilled phenomenon, right? I mean, I wrote a game about it, right? Left-wing will and the red pill phenomenon. You can be red-pilled, and you can also be Christless. And so you can be awake. You can have be outraged that you found out that you've been lied to your whole life by people in government that actually hate you. But what is it actually? But if it's not based on any more than a political ideology, it's not going to stand the test of time. And so you have to have a firm foundation. That foundation, obviously, is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ himself. So anyway, let's keep listening.
I mock pastors who wear sweater vests now in July, and I used to wear the Alex P. Keaton monogram sweater vest when I was a kid. I wanted to be Alex P. Keaton when I grew up.
I had to look that reference up. All
the panicky talking points we're hearing now, this was my pre-existing orthodoxy before my spiritual conversion. And, the thing that a biblical worldview does is it puts things in a context that not even the most learned philosophies of any era, as Paul says, where is the sage of this age who would dare stand against the word of God? And I think when we forget some of the basic fundamental facts of existence that the Word reveals to us, our philosophies have a tendency to fall apart because they're operating in the world as the philosophies want it to be, and not necessarily the world as it is. So I'm really big on honesty, I'm really big on transparency, and as long as it doesn't violate a third-party confidence, I'll tell you guys pretty much anything you ask me, all right? So let me be really open and honest. 2 years ago, we made more money, Amy and I did. She has a Christian therapy practice now as well. We made more money combined than we've ever made as a family. We made $400K 2 years ago. We went out and did Tim Pool's show 2 years ago, and Amy was like, we have got to do that for you. This is like our dream. Like,
He's talking about the infrastructure. If you go be a guest on Tim Pool, he's got like a whole compound. His living quarters and studio are all together at the same basically I guess a compound.
A house big enough where we could put the studio, the staff can come in and out all of the time and have their own access while we have privacy. So we looked at the possibility of buying and owning that kind of home in Des Moines, Iowa. And I'm just going to tell you, I mean, for what I could sell, it just to what Oron said, it doesn't matter what they tell me my house is worth on the market if no one can afford it, my current home. There's no buyer for it. They're just numbers on a page. They don't matter. All right? And then with where interest rates currently are, even with a massive down payment on that style of home, we were looking at a mortgage payment in the Des Moines, Iowa suburbs of over $5,000 a month. Could we afford that? Sure, but then we would just be house poor in a nicer home. And we're at a stage of life now where we want to pass things on to our kids. We're in a stage of life now that, when our oldest daughter calls and her oven stops working, we can just buy them, her and her husband, a stove and an oven for our granddaughter and them to, have warm food if we can do that. Or we want to take the family on a vacation, we can do that. And because it's the quality of life things that ultimately matter, it's the relationships you make and the connections you have that ultimately matter. When Amy's father, who served our country for 30 years in the 101st Airborne, we buried him 3 years ago. And we went through after that military funeral and I walked the funeral grounds. There weren't any tombstones on there that said, had the best GDP, made the most money. Everything was about relationships, what they left behind, the legacy that they left. And to me, I am concerned with technocratic, utilitarian ethics on both the right and the left. That on the left, we are mere constructs to serve their cog in the machine. And on the right, to quote the great prophet Bob Seger, we feel like a number. Okay, we're just numbers on a page. And if we're making money, but who's making it and for what point and what purpose? And I think that's the kind of context that a biblical worldview brings to the table. That does not mean what Trump is trying is going to work.
So the context of this is when this conference took place, this would have been right after the Liberation Day, where all of the tariffs were put on. The 90 countries or I can't even remember the specific number. But of course, so the context of this was, the markets had taken a giant hit. And the idea was, okay, well, and I was the same way, like, okay, well, maybe this is a corrective action that has to happen. Then, of course, there was that's where the 90 days come. Then the 90-day pause came in the next week. But so they're talking about this in the context of the markets had just taken a hit. Again, this conference was at the beginning of this month.
It's not as if the rest of the nations on earth are like, that's just adorable that they want to reassert their leverage in the global marketplace. So, we're just going to go ahead and roll over and let them do it. And for every Vietnam that will do it, there'll be a China that will say, well, we're going to go ahead and quadruple down on those now. This is going to be a fight. They're not just going to say, you guys go ahead and reassert where you were as a country in the 50s when your people worked in the meatpacking plants out of high school and your people worked in the factories that no longer exist and made a really good living and could raise a family and mom could stay home and you could send the kids to college or your son could follow you in that same mill or in that same plant and do the same exact thing. We're not going to just automatically give you that life back because you want it. This will cause some pain and it may not work. And this may be the thing ultimately that costs us 40, 50 House seats next year and ends the Trump presidency and makes him a lame duck the morning after the midterm elections. That's the gamble that is on the table right now. But even though it violates my pre-existing orthodoxies, I am going to support what he's trying to do, because I understand there's more to the law than just the letter of the law. You can tithe on every ounce of dill, cumin, and spice, but if you reject mercy and sacrifice, the spirit of the law, for the former, you've ultimately misunderstood God's word and misapplied it. And I'll just close with this.
So, I mean, what he's essentially saying here, Steve Deace, again, at the Crisis King How to Defeat Trash World Conference, he is saying, again, political philosophies, just, to have a political philosophy. What's the actual practical result? America is a place where Americans live. We talk a lot on this show about, it's obvious that the more and more corruption that comes out, that our leaders have hated us, and they have governed like they hate the people who actually live here. And that's what we're discovering. That's why, again, if the tariffs somehow work, if the income tax, now they're saying for people making $200,000 or less is going to be abolished, the IRS turning into the ERS, the external revenue. And if that actually happens, it will totally expose Washington, D.C. and all of the people we've sent up there for years and years and years as just being completely incompetent. But it's even worse than it exposes them as just being nefarious, actively deceptive, actively just essentially, in some cases, criminal. Yeah, absolutely criminal. Malicious. Intentionally malicious against the people they claim to serve and everything. Before we go any further, I want to remind you that this portion of the program brought to you by Curable CBD, Curable Premium Health, K-U-R-I-B-L. That's K-U-R-I-B-L.com. Use promo code Paul20 to save 20% off of the CBD at Curable, and we'll tell you more about their great products here in just a moment. All right, I'm going to get to the tail end of this Steve Deace comment from earlier.
The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. As far as we know, we are the only beings in the cosmos that are the image of the creator of the exact same cosmos. And so the quality of our lives matter more than the quantity of our lives. Our lives are a qualitative study, not a quantitative one.
Well said.
So he's exactly right. So this conversation then continues, and we eventually get to Dr. Stephen Wolfe. Obviously, I want to hear what he had to say during this breakout session, because he's been on the program before. Listen to what he said.
And follow from what Steve and John said. So about the tariff policy, so I can't give an expert, defense of tariff policy. All I can say is that someone I respect, Pat Buchanan, always supported tariffs, and so I support tariffs. So that's really the best I can do. But I will say that it represents, like, even if tariff policy does not succeed in its aims in their current iteration, I think it does represent a move to America first. So even if these ideas don't succeed, they still represent an underlying idea that is recovering, that is America first, that should be reflected within our immigration policy, our economic policies, social policy, all that. And then combined with that, with what John said, one of my concerns is a lot of people, particularly young people, probably young millennials and Zoomers, they're not tied to the American tradition. They're not tied to any tradition. They're tied to sort of transgressive attitudes, and they tend to latch on to things, whether it's medieval knights or World War II revisionism, something other than American. And I think that as Americans, and I think one concern we should have and something we should work towards is actually reestablishing something that I think a lot of millennials still feel, partly from influence from the boomers and that generation, this feel of love for your country, which is America. And when we hear America first, but it actually means Vatican first, or if it actually means let's return to monarchy, or if it returns if it's something to sort of dump the Constitution, I think we should reject that as actually un-American. And so what we should do is kind of rekindle within the hearts of young people a love for their particular country, and not try to find meaning outside of that country in another place, in a different history, a different people. It's certainly fine to have hobbies such as, you want to look into World War II and say, actually, that's not true, or this is true, whatever. But in the end, your desire should be to have a connection to a people and place that are actually your people and place. So that's my kind of central concern, and it's something that I know John and I are very interested in pursuing.
Could I add one thing to that real quick?
All right, so very well said by Dr. Stephen Wolf. And, well, I think John Harris has something else to add that's going to kind of, it's going to indict me a little bit. Listen to this.
And this is, I guess, a heuristic here, but if you, and I don't mean to like make anyone feel guilty, but it's something to assess in yourself. If you know more about a fantasy world, if you know more about Middle Earth, or if you know more about an anime world or the Marvel universe than you do your own country's history, it's time to get to work. It's time to reconnect yourself to your own Christian heritage that exists here in this wonderful country we call America.
If you know more about Middle Earth than your own country, it's time to get to work. That one that one hit home for me. Yeah, so confession's good for the soul, bad for the reputation in that regard. But he is right. I mean, and back to what Stephen Wolf was saying, I agree with that. The idea there is, and this is kind of circling around the same thing as I talked about. You can get into this angry red-pilled crowd, but if it's Christless, or people call it Christless conservatism, it's not really going to lead you anywhere else. I think Orrin McIntyre even mentions, the difference between a French Revolution versus an American Revolution, and we don't want the French Revolution. A Christless conservatism will lead to something like the French Revolution, and the same thing with the left. We know with the left, we know the Christless godlessness of the left. So let's actually, the next clip that I want to play, I'm going to go to Calvin Robinson, who made the journey. There were some people that were upset that he was even invited to this conference because he's Anglican and he's not a Protestant. I wasn't one of the people that were upset at all, but some people were upset, and people had to be like, guys, it's no big deal. Like, this is not a theological conference. This is the title of the conference. It's very much ecumenical and trying to discuss how to defeat Trash World, which is essentially the world that well, let me just give you an example of Trash World real quick. Here is TikTok influencers showing off their surrogate children. So here's two gay guys who were able to buy some babies.
Oh! Wow. Kyle, you want to sit on my shoulder?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so
sit on my shoulder?
you see this
No.
very much.
Oh, look at all your balloons. You love it? Do you love it?
Okay, so that's just one example. It's just one example of Trash World, and there's many more. That's an obvious one. All right, but anyway, Father Calvin Robinson was at the on this panel, and this is I think we've got his clip queued up.
Might be missing. Well, as the token foreigner, I think America First is a great policy. I think the tariffs are a great idea. I was celebrating them yesterday because Britain got a 10% tariff, but the European Union got a 20% tariff. So it justified our decision to leave the European Union and get our sovereignty back as a nation, which is always a good thing. But then also, your president said he's going to use his soft power. He said to the UK, there is no free trade without free speech in the UK. And as a Brit, that really hits home because we have no free speech. Our Prime Minister was in your Oval Office just a couple of weeks ago, and he sat there and said, we've had a long history of free speech in the UK, and we're very proud of it. But your Vice President pushed back on that, thankfully, because we do have, as I mentioned earlier, people being arrested for thought crime, never mind what they're saying. So it's good to see that America First does also extend out. But in terms of the GDP part that we alluded to earlier, We have that in the UK too. We see this problem of we have to get the numbers up, we have to get the numbers up, more numbers, more numbers. And that's an argument to be made, and if you want to go down that route, fine. But if you're pumping the numbers up, the question is from where? And in the UK, we have the issue that most of our immigrants are from Islamic countries, and what we're doing is we're ignoring our Christian duties to South Syria, northern Nigeria, Artsakh, places where there are Christians being persecuted by Mohammedans. We don't let them in. But for some reason, there are more Albanians in the UK than there are in Albania. And so we've got it back to front. And I think America might want to ask the question soon is, well, the Christians left in the UK, would we want them coming to America instead of X, Y, and Z and certain, hundreds of thousands of Indians that Elon Musk wants coming over? So you've got to look at the people that you're inviting and the values that they have, and do they align with your values? But I think the wider question to all of us is, well, to you guys from the foreigner, is what does it mean to be an American? Because I look at around America, and many people say things like, it's an idea, it's America is whatever you want it to be. Anyone could be an American. But America is now what? I would say 250 years old. Someone else earlier said 400 years old. It's time now that America can settle on who and what it is. It's time now to identify the ethnic group, the cultural group, the faith group that makes an American, and be bold with that, be unashamedly proud of that, and patriotic in that, and not let other people tell you you're not allowed an ethnicity, a culture, or a faith. You're not allowed to be a people because you're so new. You're not that new anymore. That's the truth of the matter. And to push it back a little bit on what Stephen was saying, because we agree on much, but I think there's some nuances there. There is no one single solution, in my humble opinion, of American Christian nationalism, because there's no one solution for American conservatism. There's no one solution for American anything, because America is the United States. And yes, many of those states will have been reformed. Some of those states were certainly Anglican in their constitution. One of those states was Catholic. So there is certain different Christian traditions for different parts of America. And it's important, I believe, to hold on to them too. Don't let them tell you, like the Unionists did back in the day, that there's just one America, you're one nation, one country, one idea, one faith, because there are different expressions of different traditions, and people are searching for tradition left, right, and center. And we had a little chat in the green room. People are looking at Eastern Orthodoxy and foreign traditions, Eastern traditions. There are many Western traditions that have a birthplace in this very nation that people could be looking to if you signpost them and let people know that this is also America.
Wow. If you signpost them and let people know. Yeah, so don't apologize. And I usually don't apologize for what the Bible says and put a signpost. All right, so I've only got about 12 minutes left in the hour, so I've got to get to what I thought was the best part of this, and that is, once again, Steve Deace. He gave a critique of, or basically just gave his opinion on what the state of the church is. And I thought it was, I think the room, certainly it resonated with the room. Listen to this, because I want to get this in. I don't want to cover this particular conference without letting Steve Deace say what he said. It was pretty incredible.
I think the big concern that I have, and you're seeing this if you guys, I don't know how many of you guys follow our show, but we are emphasizing a couple of themes right now. We recently took the extraordinary step of moving the category our show is listed at on iTunes, and that's the biggest contact point for our long-form content at the Blaze. More of you have iPhones than any other form of device, and so even though Spotify seems poised to surpass iTunes as the largest podcast platform in America, maybe as soon as later this year, for what Oran and I do for a living, you guys still own way more iPhones and still utilize the native app within Apple to access us more than any other platform. And so for us to switch categories is a big deal. And we made the decision a few weeks ago, we switched our show into the religion and spirituality category. And it was in the news category from the beginning. And that's its more logical home, frankly. But the reason we did that is when I first got into this business, I always had a goal of, I wanted God to use the talents and abilities and opportunities that He gave me to do for a biblical worldview what Rush's talents and abilities did for conservatism as a political construct. That his talents and abilities allowed conservatism to get back into the mainstream of the American conversation all over again. And I wanted to use our show as an inflection point, an entry point for a biblical worldview. Let the lion out of its cage. We've attributed that from everybody to Spurgeon, to Augustine. They probably all have used this reference, but let the lion out of its cage. Let's get back into the arena of where back to the city gate, and it's these devices in our pocket. That's the city gate nowadays. But bring the biblical worldview back to the city gate, and it'll defend itself just fine. And so I thought the path to do that was the fact that I was converted late in life. All the pop culture minutia that John was rightly putting in its proper context.
About Middle Earth.
I know so much about that stuff, guys. My wife would tell you, she's sitting there in the front row, and she would tell you that if she had not had my 3 kids, she'd swear I'm still a virgin, okay? I mean, I can still nerd out with the best of them on this kind of stuff, And so I thought that my knowledge of that nothingness would maybe help me broaden with the platform, whatever God did with it, would help me broaden the appeal of a biblical worldview. And in the last couple of years, I started to change my thinking, and my paradigm began to shift. And this last election cemented it for me, that we have to actually disciple the church. And one of the things I've said to candidates and causes I've worked with and for over the years is you cannot win in politics without a base. And one of the classic mistakes a lot of candidates make, and very good ones, is they immediately try to broaden their appeal before they've established a base. And you have to also understand who you are and be self-aware, and who your base could actually be, not who you want it to be. Okay? And I realized I was actually violating my own orthodoxy, that I'm trying to reach a broader culture with some of the expressions and the way that I communicate that could be at times borderline crude, but would be understandable, like that scene in the movie Father Stu, where the classic priest gets up to try to talk to the prisoners there in the cells, and they don't understand anything he's saying. And Mark Wahlberg's priest gets up, and he comes from the streets, so he knows their language and their curse words, and suddenly they completely understand what it is he's trying to communicate. That's kind of a crude metaphor for my methodology up until this point. But this last election now, for the first time, the broader culture, MAGA in particular, whatever you think of it as a movement, as a brand, MAGA in particular is ahead of the Christian church collectively in engaging the moral fights of this age. That is both a credit to MAGA and a shame to the church, and I can promise you that is not a long-standing path to victory. No political philosophy can withstand the spirit of the age. Cannot happen. All right, we are fighting a spiritual war here. And so, to have young men who are not here today, they're roofing somewhere, or they're pouring concrete somewhere, okay, and they don't understand why something has gone wrong, but they know something has gone wrong. Or that young Hispanic man, Trump won Hispanic men outright by 10 points. A lot of those young Hispanic men, frankly, are the kids we once called dreamers, that their illegal parents brought with them when they were here, or they were pregnant with them and had them when they were here. Well, they're now embedded in America. They're second-generation Americans now. And they're like, I don't want to go back to Honduras, and I don't want whatever the Sam hell is going on in Honduras. I don't want to bring that here. So build a wall, secure the border, right? They don't kind of really know what we're talking about up here, but instinctively they kind of get it. Way more than your sweater-vested, pleated khaki pastor, Hawaiian shirt in January wearing pastor gets it. And the church has got to catch up here. And if it does not systemically catch up here, what happened in this last election is not a movement. We got a TO baby, like Dickie V used to tell us to do when we're down by 20. We got a timeout. We stopped their momentum, but we didn't actually start putting points on the board. And I looked at the scoreboard after the timeout, we're still down by 20. We're going to need the church to have a long-standing movement. And I just don't think much of the church is equipped. And again, just being brutally honest, I probably had a dozen people reach out to me that I know and tell me not to come here today and not to do this event. And I'm going to tell you what I told every single one of them. After spending 20 years in this business trying to get the church to rise up and be tougher, I'm not really in much of a mood to suddenly say, but not like that, not quite like that. Now, that does not mean necessarily that we don't have standards ourselves that we have to uphold, and God will not hold us to. And that's, if we want to win, we have to live by kingdom rules, not by worldly rules of engagement. And I'll talk about that in my talk later this afternoon. But the church has to catch up. Because what we're trying to do here is rerun the American Revolution, not the French Revolution.
It was him, not
and you know, the vote populi, those people are still totally depraved sinners too, even if their instincts are correct. Give them power, they won't do any different than the aristocracy. They'll just put a different group of people in prison. They won't do any differently, right? We're just going to swing the pendulum from the whole thing about, well, today it's about being based. Well, really, what are you based in? Who are you based upon? Based on what? Right? And I think this is where real discipleship and catechesis that can only come from the church. It's the only transcendent institution God ever gave mankind. And if it doesn't take discipleship seriously again, all the stuff that we're up here, the back and forth with different sects and movements that I get, people try to drag me into on X all the time, and I try to stay away from like the plague because I got enough of my own enemies when I open my own mouth, frankly. All right? But all those things that we have the luxury of discussing and debating ourselves right now, they're going to be all irrelevant in the next midterm election if the church doesn't catch up and quick. And that's what I am concerned about. The church has spent the last 20 years trying to reach Karen in the suburbs, your Christian music station, uplifting and hope-filled. It's always about reaching Karen and Mildred in the suburbs and Betamaxing her husband. And it's done nothing. It's lost the culture completely. And, you know, headship means if you get the husband, you get the whole family too. All right? And that's what we have to do. We've got to reach the men before it is too late. I have lots of friends, high-ranking people in Moms for Liberty. Some of them have been guests in my home. I love them to death. But frankly, to some degree, it is a shame to the men that such an organization was even necessary in the first place. And I want to grab those men who scroll their phones while they spent all those years driving their daughters to all those soccer practices and swim practices and track meets, only to then just sit there and scroll their phones in the stands, while men with gender dysphoria and demonic oppression in their lives go out there and steal their valor and the hard work that they did, and they cannot be bothered. And so Mama Bear has to show up again. It is time for the men to show up, all right? And we have to have the men. That's my concern, but the church doesn't want to reach the men. And the reason why it doesn't want to reach the men, and this is where men and women are different, all right? If you have a vibrant men's ministry and you go after the men, what will happen is the men will come together once or twice, disclose their sins, seek forgiveness, restoration. But then if all we're going to do here is just talk every time, we're not women. We don't necessarily gain a constant, you know, reinforcement from just dialoguing like women do. We're not as relational as creatures. We're more bottom line oriented than they are. And so for us, we're going to be like, after week 3, we're like, okay, I got a lawn to mow, I've got a business to run, I've got stuff to do. So are we going to go to war or not? And most of your pastors don't want to go to war. And that's why they don't want to engage the men. Okay? So to me, I think we have to disciple the church, and the church has to catch up, at least in the next couple of years, has to be where MAGA is, at least. Okay? And if it's not, all the stuff that we came out of this last election excited about, it's going to be very fleeting, in my opinion.
Again, you can watch that full clip. It's up on X right now. Again, Steve Deace, Stephen Wolfe, Calvin Robinson, Orrin McIntyre, John Harris, Joel Webbin. It was a conference that was quite the announcement of the conference back was among some Christian circles was controversial, but obviously, I mean, I watched the whole discussion. I thought I thought it was actually very enjoyable, and there were very great points raised that really warrant even further discussion. Unfortunately, I am out of time, and I don't have time to go into it further, but I think you should, and that's why I wanted to feature it on the program. I do want to remind you to go to curable.com for all of their great CBD products. That's KURIBL.com. Use promo code Paul20. It's not just the gummies. It's not just the muscle cream. That's fantastic. They also have stuff on here for pets. They also have bath soaks. You also want to make sure you get their tinctures. You see there the pet support right there. It's incredible stuff. It's the best CBD out on the market. And again, they don't use harmful pesticides or chemicals when they grow it. They till the soil, plant the seed, harvest the hemp, extract the CBD from it, and then it's all done under third-party testing. So it's curable.com. Use promo code Paul20. Save 20%. That's curable.com. Use promo code Paul20. Folks, that's all the time that we have for this edition of the Millstone Report. Unless I'm providentially hindered, I will see you back here on Tuesday, and have a blessed rest of your Monday. Thank you so much for watching. God bless.
The very foundation of the Christian faith is based